The red digital numbers on the white subway tile wall glow with a harsh, unforgiving light. 8:14 p.m. The air inside the main kitchen of L'Étoile isn't just hot. It is a physical weight. 110 degrees of suffocating, grease-filled humidity pressing down on the shoulders of every cook on the line. The massive steel exhaust hoods roar like jet engines above the stoves, frantically trying to suck up the thick white smoke, but they can't pull away the smell. It hangs in the air, heavy and sharp, the acrid, bitter sting of scorched butter. The panic-inducing stench of ruined bone marrow. In the exact center of the plating station, resting over a high blue flame on the induction burner, sits a wide, heavy-bottomed copper pan. Inside that pan is a complete and total catastrophe. The Grand Veneer sauce. It is supposed to be the undisputed soul of the restaurant's legacy. A flawless, mirror-glossy emulsion of reduced venison blood, red wine, and butter that takes 3 days to prepare. Instead, the sauce is dying right in front of them. The delicate protein structure has completely shattered under the intense Rex heat. A thick, sickening layer of pale yellow fat pools at the edges, violently bubbling and separating from the dark, grainy liquid underneath. It doesn't look like a 3-star Michelin masterpiece anymore. It looks like boiling, greasy mud. Small bubbles rise to the surface and burst with a sluggish, mocking pop, splashing hot grease onto the pristine stainless steel counter. 2 feet away, Julian, a 19-year-old commis chef, stands absolutely frozen. His fingers are clamped so tightly around a pair of steel plating tongs that his knuckles are bone white. The cold metal digs deeply into his palms, but he doesn't feel it. A heavy bead of sweat rolls down his forehead, stinging his left eye. He doesn't wipe it away. He doesn't even blink. He can only stare at the man standing over the ruined pan. Head, Chef Laurent. Laurent is only 30 years old. Normally, he moves through this kitchen with the arrogant, untouchable swagger of a king, wearing a custom-tailored, imported Egyptian cotton chef's coat that costs more than Julian makes in a month. His name is embroidered over his heart in shining gold thread. But right now, that expensive white coat is plastered to his spine, soaked dark with cold, terrified sweat. Laurent's chest heaves in shallow, ragged gasps. He leans heavily over the prep table, both hands gripping the steel edge so hard his forearms tremble. He stares down into the broken emulsion, his jaw violently shaking. His perfectly manicured fingernails scrape uselessly against the metal. Just 20 feet away, through the small round glass window of the swinging wooden doors, the dining room is deadly quiet. Out there, sitting alone at table 4, is Anton Vogel. He isn't just a food critic. He is the most ruthless Michelin inspector on the continent, a man who doesn't just strip stars, but dismantles businesses and ruins careers with a single, quiet stroke of his pen. Right now, Vogel is sitting in the air-conditioned dining room, slowly tapping a silver spoon against a pristine white tablecloth, waiting. The digital timer on the wall ticks down. They have exactly 12 minutes to plate the venison. 12 minutes before Vogel stands up and walks out. 12 minutes before the investors pull their millions, the bank forecloses, and the heavy glass doors of L'Étoile are padlocked for good. Laurent opens his mouth to shout an order, to demand a backup batch, but there is no backup. His mind is completely, hopelessly blank. The absolute panic paralyzes his throat. He reaches out with a shaking hand, grabbing a spoon to stir the fat, but the oil just swirls uselessly. He drops the spoon. It clatters against the steel. Laurent lowers his head, shutting his eyes tight. Then, underneath the deafening roar of the exhaust fans, a new sound cuts through the heavy air. Squeak, slap, squeak, slap. It's the slow, heavy sound of waterlogged rubber dragging across the greasy terracotta floor tiles. Julian blinks, turning his head slightly. A shadow emerges from the dark, steamy, suffocating back corner of the dish pit. Laurent doesn't notice. He is too busy drowning in his own failure. An arm reaches into the blinding fluorescent light of the prep station. It brushes right past the gold stitching on Laurent's shoulder. The contrast is jarring. The arm doesn't belong in the pristine plating area. It is wrapped in a cheap gray plastic apron, heavily soaked in dirty, grayish dishwater. As the arm moves closer to the heat, the harsh chemical smell of cheap floor detergent and industrial ammonia completely cuts through the scent of the burnt butter. Then the hand reaches the counter. It isn't the soft, manicured hand of a modern television chef. The skin is leather tough, stripped pale and dry from 14-hour shifts plunged into scalding, soapy water. The knuckles are severely swollen. But underneath the chemical dryness, the back of the hand and the forearm are completely covered in a map of thick, faded, silvery burn scars. The unmistakable, permanent branding of a master who has spent decades playing with open flames. The index finger carries a massive, permanent callus, the exact kind of mark formed by gripping the spine of a heavy French chef's knife for 30 years. It is Elias, the 62-year-old dishwasher. His gray hair is plastered to his forehead with sweat. Without asking for permission, without making a single sound, those scarred, calloused fingers reach down to the cutting board. They wrap firmly around the wooden handle of a heavy copper whisk. There isn't a single tremor in his grip. With a sharp, precise jerk, Elias pulls the whisk right out of Laurent's trembling hand. Laurent's eyes snap wide open. The sheer shock breaks through his paralyzing panic, instantly replaced by pure, blinding indignation. The blood rushes violently back to his pale face, turning his cheeks a dark, furious red, his teeth bare in an ugly snarl. How dare this filthy, invisible old man touch his station? Laurent drops his right shoulder, shifting his weight. He raises his arm, stepping forward to violently shove the fragile dishwasher away from his stove. He opens his mouth, drawing in a massive breath to scream, to demand the old man be thrown out into the freezing back alley. But he never makes a sound. Elias doesn't flinch. He doesn't take a single step backward to defend himself. He doesn't even look at the ruined pan. The old dishwasher slowly turns his head. He locks his eyes directly onto Laurent's. The look in Elias's eyes is completely still, cold, heavy. It is entirely devoid of any fear. It is the look of a mountain staring down a pebble, the heavy, freezing, absolute authority of a man who has survived storms Laurent couldn't even begin to imagine. Laurent's raised hand freezes in mid-air. The angry words die instantly in his throat. A cold chill runs down his spine, entirely stripping him of his power in his own kitchen. The arrogant head chef takes a slow, involuntary step backward. Elias turns his attention back to the roaring stove. His scarred fingers adjust their grip on the copper whisk. His thumb slides into the exact, undeniable position of a master saucier. But before a silent dishwasher saved a culinary empire, we need to go back. 6 months back. 6 months earlier. The dish pit at L'Étoile isn't just a kitchen station. It is a concrete box built for punishment. Hidden away at the very back of the restaurant, the air doesn't circulate. It hangs heavy and wet, choked by the constant 180-degree steam blasting from the industrial sanitizers. Every single breath tastes bitterly of sour milk, rotting food scraps, and the sharp, eye-watering burn of chemical floor cleaner. Elias stands directly in the center of the fog. He leans his heavy weight over a deep steel sink filled with murky, dark gray water. He aggressively scrubs the blackened bottom of a heavy cast iron pan. He doesn't wear rubber gloves. The harsh chemicals ate through his last pair 3 days ago, and management absolutely refused to issue a new set until Monday. The physical toll on his body is brutal. The industrial soap has entirely stripped his skin of its natural oils, leaving it tight, pale, and peeling. Deep, painful red fissures run along his swollen knuckles. 3 cheap plastic bandages wrap around his fingers, but the scalding water melted the adhesive hours ago. The pale strips of plastic dangle uselessly in the dirty water, exposing his raw, bleeding flesh to the stinging chemicals. Every time he grips the wire brush, a white-hot needle of pain shoots straight up his forearm. He doesn't wince. His jaw locks tight. He just keeps scrubbing. At 10:15 p.m., a loud buzzer sounds. Elias gets his only break of the shift, a mandatory 3-minute window. He pushes the heavy steel door open, stepping out into the freezing back alley. The winter wind instantly cuts through his soaking wet cotton shirt, making the muscles in his back violently shiver. He leans his tired shoulders against the cold brick wall. Slowly, he reaches a wet, shaking hand into his left chest pocket, pressing his fingers flat right over his heart. He pulls out a folded, terribly creased piece of paper. The edges are soft from months of absorbing his sweat. He unfolds it under the flickering, yellow street lamp. A hospital billing statement. The total printed at the bottom reads $84,000. Stamped aggressively across the top in heavy red ink are 2 words: past due. Tucked carefully behind the bill is a small, faded photograph. A woman with tired eyes and a gentle, warm smile. His late wife. Elias's thumb hovers over the glossy paper. He doesn't cry. His throat simply swallows hard, the thick tendons in his neck pulling tight. The collection agency called twice yesterday, threatening to take the small, empty house he built for her. He desperately needs this miserable job. He needs the meager paycheck, and more importantly, he needs the basic corporate health insurance to pay off her final days. Pride doesn't pay off medical debt. He carefully folds the paper, presses it back against his chest, and pushes the heavy metal door open. Back inside, the heavy double doors of the dining room swing violently open. Head chef Laurent walks onto the line. The temperature in the kitchen doesn't drop, but the atmosphere instantly freezes. Laurent doesn't walk like a chef checking his stations. He parades in like a celebrity demanding an audience. He wears a custom-tailored coat, blindingly white and heavily starched. A heavy gold watch peeks out from his rolled-up sleeve. He smells strongly of a heavy, expensive designer cologne that completely masks the delicate aroma of roasting garlic on the stoves. But the most insulting detail of his entire wardrobe is on his feet. In a commercial kitchen coated in splashing grease, animal fat, and spilled wine, Laurent wears pure white, spotless suede loafers. They don't have a single drop of dirt on them. Because Laurent doesn't cook, he commands. He isn't holding a tasting spoon or a kitchen knife. He is holding a glowing smartphone. He steps up to Julien's prep station. The young commie chef is frantically stirring a pan of shallots. "Stop," Laurent snaps. Julien instantly freezes, his eyes wide. Laurent steps forward, raising his smartphone. He angles the camera over the pan, tapping the screen to adjust the lighting. "You're ruining the lighting," Laurent mutters, snapping a photo for his thousands of online followers. He doesn't taste the shallots. He doesn't check the heat. He just posts the picture. A few feet behind him, Julien's elbow accidentally knocks a small metal cup off the counter. It hits the floor with a sharp clatter, spilling a wide, slick puddle of yellow duck fat across the gray tiles. Elias steps out of the shadows. He carries a heavy yellow plastic bucket filled with dark, soapy water and a thick string mop. He walks quietly over to the spill. Laurent, still completely absorbed in his phone screen, takes a careless blind step backward. His pristine white suede shoe comes down right on the edge of the spilled oil. His foot slips. He stumbles, his arms flailing as he desperately tries to keep his balance and protect his precious phone. He doesn't fall, but his perfect balance is broken. He looks down. A thick smear of yellow grease stains the perfect white suede of his left shoe. Laurent's face twists into a mask of pure, ugly disgust. He doesn't blame his own lack of attention. His head snaps up. He sees Elias kneeling near the spill, wiping the floor with a rag. Without a single second of hesitation, Laurent draws his leg back. He violently kicks the heavy plastic bucket. The bucket tips over. 2 gallons of dark gray, foul-smelling mop water crash heavily onto the floor. The disgusting wave washes directly over Elias's worn-out work boots, instantly soaking the bottom of his thin trousers. The entire kitchen goes dead still. The frantic clatter of knives and pans stops completely. The only sound is the dirty water dripping from Elias's clothes onto the tiles. Laurent wipes an imaginary speck of dirt from his white jacket. He steps right into Elias's personal space. "Keep your eyes on the floor, old man." Laurent spits, his voice dripping with absolute venom. "It's the only thing you're good for." He turns on his heel and storms out of the prep area, furiously typing on his phone. Elias doesn't argue. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't shout about his dead wife, or the crushing debt, or the absolute injustice of the moment. His jaw tightens. He reaches for a dry towel, slowly sinking back down into the dirty puddle. But as the arrogant chef walked away laughing, he had no idea. He didn't know that the broken old man kneeling at his feet was quietly analyzing the smell of the red wine reduction bubbling on the stove above him, and finding it completely, hopelessly worthless. Friday night, 8:30 p.m., the absolute peak of the dinner rush. The kitchen of L'Étoile isn't just a workplace. It is a suffocating high-speed war zone. The ambient temperature near the heavy iron ranges spikes to 115 degrees. The air is incredibly thick with aerosolized cooking oil, shouting voices, and the chaotic clatter of heavy steel pans. Above it all, the terrifying rhythmic sound of the ticket printer cuts through the noise. Ch-ch-ch. It spits out order after order. A long white snake of thermal paper drags heavily across the greasy floor tiles, demanding dozens of complex dishes all at once. Julien, the young commis chef, is drowning. Sweat pours down his pale face, violently stinging his eyes. His station is totally overwhelmed. Resting on his wooden cutting board is a massive $300 cut of premium Wagyu tenderloin. He just pulled it directly off the blazing hot grill. The meat is seared dark on the outside, violently smoking. Julien is panicking. He grabs a heavy carving knife. His hand trembles violently as he raises the blade, fully intending to slice the steak right open and plate it immediately. It is a fatal mistake. If he cuts that meat right now, the heavily pressurized internal juices will completely burst. They will flood the cutting board in a red pool, leaving the expensive cut of meat instantly dry, gray, and totally ruined. The heavy steel blade begins to drop. Suddenly, a wet, heavy hand clamps firmly over Julien's wrist. The young chef gasps, looking up. It's Elias. The old dishwasher holds Julien's hand in a tight, unyielding grip. The heavy yellow rubber of his apron drips dirty water onto the floor tiles. Elias doesn't shout. He leans in close, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that cuts right through the chaos. "Don't," Elias murmurs, his dark eyes fixed entirely on the meat. The muscle fibers are violently contracting. You are at 130 degrees internal. The thermal carryover will push it to 135 in 3 minutes. You need to let it rest. Put it on the cold rack. 6 minutes. Or you bleed it dry. Julian freezes. The exact, surgical precision of the instruction doesn't match the dirty, soaking wet apron the man wears. The pure, undeniable authority in the old man's voice completely paralyzes him. He slowly lowers the knife, stepping back to grab a wire resting rack. Elias gives a short, silent nod. As he turns to go back to his dish cart, his wet apron catches on the sharp corner of the prep table. The violent tug pulls something out of the deep inner pocket of his stained shirt. A heavy, incredibly worn, leather-bound notebook falls flat onto the stainless steel counter. The old cover is deeply cracked. Thick, yellowed pages stick out of the edges, heavily packed with complex, hand-drawn thermodynamic charts, molecular temperature curves, and tightly written sauce ratios. Elias instantly goes rigid. He reaches out quickly to grab the book. A heavy hand forcefully slaps down on top of it. Elias looks up, standing directly across the table, his face twisted in ugly, arrogant rage, is head chef Laurent. Laurent had been watching. His massive ego cannot tolerate the sight of a filthy dishwasher touching his food, let alone correcting one of his cooks. Laurent violently shoves Julian out of the way, sending the young boy crashing heavily into the dry storage rack. Then, Laurent snatches the leather notebook right off the counter. "What is this?" Laurent snarls, his voice echoing over the roar of the exhaust fans. "Giving cooking lessons now, old man. The floor scrubber thinks he's a master." The entire kitchen stops moving. Every cook on the line turns their head. The frantic chopping ceases. The ticket printer goes silent. Elias's jaw clenches so hard the muscles in his cheeks bulge. He reaches his scarred hand out, his voice suddenly completely hollow. "Please, don't." But Laurent only sneers. He flips the fragile, ancient book open. His eyes scan the complex, handwritten chemical equations on the yellowed paper. He doesn't understand any of it. To him, it's just garbage. Laurent throws his head back and laughs. It is a cruel, echoing sound. "Listen to this," Laurent shouts to the completely silent room. He reads mockingly from the pages. Thermal binding of protein structures. Acid stabilization of animal fats. What is this trash? You think writing down big words makes you a chef? Elias steps forward. His voice breaks slightly, losing its heavy authority. "It's my wife's handwriting. She's gone. Give it back." Laurent stops laughing. He looks at Elias, his eyes narrowing into cold, malicious slits. He sees the desperate vulnerability in the old man's posture. He sees exactly how much this dirty little book means to him. And Laurent decides to destroy it. "You don't touch my cooks. You don't look at my food," Laurent hisses. "And if she wrote this garbage, she was an idiot, too." With a violent tearing motion, Laurent grips a thick handful of the fragile yellow pages. He rips them completely out of the leather binding. The harsh, sickening sound of tearing paper cuts sharply through the quiet kitchen. Elias's chest heaves, his eyes widen in absolute horror. Laurent turns. Right beside the prep station is the open metal grate of the floor grease trap. It is currently catching a heavy, slow stream of boiling hot, discarded deep fryer oil from the fry station above it. A thick, bubbling pool of 200-degree waste fat and rotting food scraps. Without breaking eye contact with Elias, Laurent drops the ruined notebook directly into the boiling oil. A collective gasp ripples through the line cooks. Julian covers his mouth in horror. The ancient paper instantly sizzles, turning violently black as the boiling grease rapidly absorbs the ink. Laurent crosses his arms over his pristine white coat. He waits for the old man to scream, to cry, to throw a punch and give him the excuse to call the police. Elias doesn't make a single sound. The old man steps forward. He doesn't look at Laurent. He doesn't roll up his sleeve. He drops to his knees on the hard concrete floor. He plunges his bare, heavily scarred right arm directly into the boiling grease trap. The thick, searing hot oil instantly coats his skin. A sharp, terrible hissing sound fills the air. Julian squeezes his eyes shut, turning his head away. Elias's face turns a dark, dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulge to the point of snapping. But he doesn't scream. He digs his bare fingers deep into the burning sludge, gripping the slippery, ruined leather cover of the notebook. The scalding heat instantly cooks his flesh, but his grip only tightens. Slowly, agonizingly, he pulls it out. Thick drops of boiling black fat drip heavily off his trembling knuckles onto his wet shoes. The pages are entirely destroyed, melted into a solid, black block of grease. Elias pulls the ruined book tightly against his chest, completely ignoring the burning oil soaking deeply into his cotton shirt. He slowly stands back up. Laurent scoffs, rolling his eyes in disgust. "Clean this mess up," Laurent barks at the room, "and get this crazy old man out of my sight before I fire him." Laurent turns his back and walks away, adjusting the collar of his expensive coat. He thought he had just crushed a miserable dishwasher. He thought he had won. He had no idea. He didn't know that the fragile, yellowed pages, sinking into the oil, were originally written inside a 3-star Michelin kitchen in Lyon. He had no idea he had just awakened a ghost. 30 years ago, Lyon, France. The kitchen inside Domaine de la Croix didn't sound like a war zone. It didn't have the frantic, chaotic clatter of thrown pans or the terrified shouting of overwhelmed line cooks. It sounded like a church. There was only the rhythmic, precise sound of heavy steel knives hitting wooden boards, and the low, constant hiss of simmering copper pots. The air was thick with the rich, earthy scent of slow-roasted veal bones reducing into dark liquid gold. Fresh thyme and crushed black peppercorns hung heavy in the steam. Standing over the massive iron stoves was Chef Armand. He was a pure master saucier, an old man who didn't rely on digital timers or modern thermometers. And standing right beside him, completely silent and absorbing every single movement, was a 22-year-old Elias. One evening, a massive copper pot of heavily reduced stock suddenly boiled over. The delicate fat separated violently from the liquid. A young cook panicked, rushing forward to grab the pot and dump the ruined sauce down the drain. Armand grabbed the cook's wrist, stopping him instantly. Elias never forgot the exact words the master spoke next. "A broken sauce isn't a failure," Armand murmured. His worn, calloused hands calmly reached for a handful of crushed ice and a heavy copper whisk. "It is simply a chemical rebellion. The proteins are fighting the fat. You don't throw it away. You shock it. You manipulate the thermal structure, and you force it to submit to your will." Under Armand's guidance, Elias didn't just learn recipes. He learned the exact invisible laws of culinary physics. He built a deep, permanent muscle memory directly into his hands. 10 years later, Elias took over his own kitchen. At 32 years old, he earned his very first Michelin star. He wore a crisp, perfectly tailored white coat. He stood in the center of his own dining room, holding a heavy brass plaque. Standing right next to him, her fingers firmly laced through his, was his wife, Marie. She wasn't a chef, but she had a brilliant mathematical mind. She was the one who translated his intuitive, physical cooking into exact thermodynamic equations, writing them down in a thick leather notebook. It was the absolute peak of his life. And then the floor simply gave out. The transition wasn't cinematic. It was violently mundane. The warm, golden lighting of the dining room was abruptly replaced by the harsh, blinding white fluorescent lights of a hospital ward. Marie was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive neurological decline. The doctors explained that she needed round-the-clock, specialized care. The terrifying, steady beep of a cardiac monitor entirely replaced the quiet hum of the copper pans. The medical bills didn't arrive in the hundreds. They arrived in the tens of thousands. Insurance covered almost nothing. Elias didn't hesitate. A Michelin star couldn't buy a single tank of oxygen. Pride couldn't pay for her morphine. Late one rainy night, Elias stood alone in his pristine kitchen. He quietly packed his custom-forged, high-carbon steel knives into a leather roll. Tools he had spent over a decade breaking in, the metal perfectly molded to the exact shape of his grip. He took off his heavily starched chef's coat, folded it perfectly, and left it on the stainless steel counter. He signed the papers the next morning, selling his beloved restaurant for a fraction of its worth to pay for her hospital bed. He traded his white coat for a cheap, heavy rubber dishwasher's apron. He took the lowest, most degrading jobs in the industry, simply because corporate restaurant chains offered immediate cash and a basic health insurance policy. He buried Chef Elias deep underground. He willingly walked into the dark, suffocating dish pits, accepting the chemical burns and the constant humiliation, just to keep her breathing for a few more months. And when Marie finally passed away, a massive piece of Elias's soul died with her. He swore he would never pick up a whisk again. He believed his hands were completely dead. Present day, the freezing alleyway behind L'Etoile. Elias sits completely alone on an overturned plastic milk crate. The freezing winter wind bites at his soaking wet clothes, but he doesn't feel the cold. He looks down at his right hand. The skin across his knuckles is completely destroyed. The boiling fryer grease violently blistered the flesh, turning it a dark, angry red. The pain is absolute agony, shooting sharp electric spikes all the way up his forearm. Resting heavily on his knees is a solid, black, greasy lump, the ruined, completely illegible remains of Marie's leather notebook. The pages where she had carefully written out his greatest recipes are completely gone. Elias stares at the black lump. For 10 years, he swallowed his pride. He took the insults. He took the kicks, the spilled water, the verbal abuse from arrogant children like Laurent. He did it because he thought a ghost shouldn't fight back. But as Elias stares at his burned, trembling hand, the overwhelming grief slowly burns away, and something else takes its place. A cold, heavy, terrifying resolve. He reaches into a cheap plastic first aid kit sitting on the brick wall beside him. He pulls out a thick roll of rough white medical gauze. Elias bites one end of the gauze. With his left hand, he slowly begins to wrap his heavily burned right hand. He pulls the white cotton tightly across the raw blisters. A dark red stain of blood immediately seeps through the fresh white bandages. But he doesn't flinch. He wraps the knuckles. He secures the wrist. He pulls the knot incredibly tight with his teeth, testing his grip. It looks exactly like a heavyweight boxer wrapping his hands before a championship fight. He doesn't look at the ruined notebook anymore. He leaves it on the milk crate. He stands up. Suddenly, the heavy metal door of the kitchen violently flies open, slamming hard against the brick wall. Julian, the young commie chef, stands in the doorway. The boy is hyperventilating. His eyes are wide with absolute uncontrolled panic. "Elias!" Julian gasps, his voice cracking entirely. "He's here. Anton Vogel is in the dining room." Elias doesn't say a word. He just watches the boy panic. Laurent tried to rush the heat. Julian stammers, tears welling in his eyes. "The Grand Veneer sauce. It's breaking. The whole pan is breaking. We're going to lose the restaurant." The freezing wind howls through the alley. Elias looks down at his heavily bandaged right hand. He slowly flexes his fingers. The master is awake. We are exactly back in the absolute center of the nightmare. 8:26 p.m. The red digital timer on the stainless steel wall violently blinks. 3 minutes and 45 seconds remaining. Laurent's hand hovers in the air, his face pale and dripping with cold sweat. He tries to shout for security. He tries to aggressively order the old dishwasher to step back from his stove. But the terrifying, icy weight of Elias's stare completely crushes his vocal cords. Elias doesn't give him a second chance. He firmly plants his heavy rubber work boots onto the floor mat. He steps directly in front of the roaring induction burner, physically blocking Laurent from the pan. Laurent stumbles backward, his expensive suede shoes slipping slightly on the greasy floor tiles. Elias looks down into the heavy copper pan. The extreme heat radiating from the metal is blinding. The Grand Veneer sauce is a disgusting, violently separated mess of pale floating fat and scorched red wine. It smells heavily of burnt iron and utter failure. "You're going to get us shut down," Laurent stammers, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "It's entirely ruined. Dump it down the drain." Elias entirely ignores the arrogant head chef. His dark eyes rapidly scan the prep station. He needs to violently drop the core temperature. He reaches his heavily bandaged right hand deep into the raw seafood bar. He grabs a massive, freezing handful of crushed ice. Without a single second of hesitation, he throws the solid ice directly into the boiling, separated fat. A terrifying, violent hiss erupts. A thick, blinding column of hot white steam shoots straight up into the steel exhaust hood. The extreme thermal shock causes the pan to violently spit hot grease across the counter. "Are you insane?" Laurent screams, shielding his face with his arms. Elias doesn't blink. The sudden, massive drop in temperature instantly forces the shattered animal proteins to aggressively contract, stopping the destructive cooking process dead in its tracks. But Elias knows that temperature alone cannot rebuild a completely broken chemical structure. He needs an alkaline agent to severely neutralize the heavy acidity of the red wine reduction. He reaches deeply into the wet pocket of his rubber apron. He pulls out a tiny crumpled paper packet of baking soda. He pinches a microscopic amount, exactly 1/8 of a teaspoon, between his scarred thumb and index finger. He drops the white powder directly into the violently steaming liquid. "It alters the pH balance," Elias murmurs, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He speaks only to young Julian, completely ignoring Laurent. It forces the acidic fats to chemically bind to the water molecules. Then, Elias firmly grips the thick wooden handle of the heavy copper whisk. He doesn't stir gently. He violently attacks the pan. He drives the metal whisk in a tight, rapid, relentless figure-8 motion. Clack, clack, clack. The heavy, rhythmic sound of thick wire hitting copper echoes loudly through the completely silent kitchen. The physical strain is immediately devastating. The extreme heat from the heavy blue flame directly hits his freshly burned knuckles. The thick white medical gauze wrapped tightly around his right hand, instantly begins to change color. A dark, wet red stain quickly seeps right through the cotton fabric. Fresh blood slowly drips down his swollen fingers, smearing heavily across the wooden handle of the whisk. Elias's jaw locks perfectly tight. The thick veins in his forearms bulge dangerously under his soaked cotton shirt. He doesn't slow down for a single second. He pushes entirely through the blinding physical agony, completely surrendering to a deeply ingrained muscle memory built over 30 hard years. The digital timer hits exactly 60 seconds. Then, the violent chemical rebellion surrenders. The ugly, bubbling yellow fat suddenly vanishes, pulled directly back down into the dark liquid. The grainy, broken texture smooths out completely. Under the brutal, relentless physical force of his whisking, the emulsion perfectly rebinds. The ruined sauce miraculously transforms. It becomes a thick, heavy, mirror-glossy glaze. It reflects the harsh fluorescent kitchen lights perfectly. It is absolute, undeniable perfection. Elias stops. He slowly lifts the heavy whisk. A thick, dark ribbon of liquid gold falls smoothly back into the copper pan. He reaches out and grabs a warm porcelain plate. He uses steel tongs to gently place the perfectly rested Wagyu beef directly in the center. With absolute precision, his trembling, heavily bleeding hand spoons the glossy Grand Veneer directly over the dark meat. He grabs a clean white towel, sharply wiping a single tiny drop of stray sauce off the wide rim of the plate. Elias steps back. He lowers his bleeding hand to his side. He looks directly at the waiter standing frozen by the doors. "Serve," Elias commands, his voice incredibly heavy and exhausted. The waiter carefully grabs the hot plate. He turns and pushes through the swinging wooden doors, stepping out into the bright, quiet dining room. The heavy doors slowly swing shut. The kitchen goes completely, suffocatingly silent. Nobody moves. Laurent stands entirely frozen in the corner. A silent dishwasher just sent his food to the most dangerous, unforgiving culinary judge on earth. Now, they wait for the executioner's verdict. 4 agonizing minutes pass. The heavy wooden doors of the kitchen swing open. The pale, trembling waiter steps back onto the line. He swallows hard, looking directly at the corner of the room. "Monsieur Vogel requests the head chef at table 4, the waiter whispers. Laurent's panicked breathing suddenly stops. The heavy terror in his chest instantly dissolves, rapidly replaced by a wild, arrogant delusion. The sauce didn't fail. It was served, and the executioner wants to see the man in charge. Laurent straightens his spine. He aggressively smooths down the wrinkles on his expensive, custom-tailored white coat. He completely ignores the bloody whisk sitting in the sink. He ignores the old dishwasher standing quietly in the shadows. "See?" Laurent sneers, leaning close to young Julien. A true executive chef knows how to manage a crisis. "I just saved your job, kid." Laurent turns on his spotless white suede heel. He pushes through the doors, pasting a charming, heavily rehearsed smile onto his face as he steps out into the low, golden light of the dining room. He walks confidently toward table 4. Anton Vogel sits completely still. The pristine white porcelain plate in front of the inspector is entirely empty. Not a single drop of the dark, glossy liquid remains. "Monsieur Vogel," Laurent begins, his voice dripping with fake humility. "I hope the venison met your incredibly high standards tonight." Vogel doesn't smile. He slowly wipes his mouth with a linen napkin. He places it precisely on the table. He looks up, his cold, gray eyes completely piercing Laurent's arrogant facade. "It was a brilliant recovery," Vogel says quietly. "Tell me, chef, at exactly what temperature did you introduce the alkaline agent to neutralize the shattered wine tannins? And how did you physically force the protein chains to bind so perfectly without using an immersion blender? Laurent freezes. The charming smile instantly dies on his face. His mind goes entirely blank. He opens his mouth, but only a pathetic stutter comes out. Well, Monsieur Vogel, it's a proprietary blend of techniques. A chef's secret, you understand. It's about feeling the heat. Clack. Vogel drops his heavy silver spoon onto the empty plate. The sharp, metallic sound cuts through the quiet dining room like a gunshot. "Do not insult my intelligence," Vogel says, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "You didn't cook this. I know exactly what this is. It is a precise thermal rebuild. There is only one man on Earth who mastered this specific chemical manipulation under the legendary chef Armand in Lyon. And he disappeared 10 years ago." Laurent's face turns the color of dead ash. A cold sweat breaks out violently across his forehead. "Monsieur Vogel, I assure you, I am the head." Before Laurent can finish his lie, the heavy wooden doors of the kitchen slowly push open. Squeak, slap, squeak, slap. The heavy, wet sound of waterlogged rubber boots echoes across the silent, expensive hardwood floor. Laurent turns his head. His breath hitches in his throat. Elias walks into the dining room. He doesn't take off his heavy yellow rubber apron. It is covered in greasy gray dishwater. He walks slowly, his shoulders tired but his spine perfectly straight. As he steps under the bright chandelier, the light catches his right hand. It is heavily wrapped in thick white medical gauze, deeply stained with fresh, dark red blood. Anton Vogel looks at the old, broken dishwasher. The ruthless inspector's eyes widen in absolute, undisguised shock. He pushes his heavy oak chair back. Vogel stands up, and right there, in the middle of the crowded dining room, the most feared food critic in the country deeply respectfully bows his head. "Chef Elias," Vogel says, his voice thick with overwhelming emotion. "The culinary world thought we had lost you forever." A collective gasp ripples through the surrounding tables. Laurent takes a weak, staggering step backward. His legs completely give out. He hits the edge of an empty table, gripping the tablecloth so hard his knuckles turn white. His entire arrogant world shatters into a million invisible pieces. The man he had kicked, humiliated, and verbally abused wasn't just a dishwasher, he was culinary royalty. But the universe wasn't finished with Laurent. From the dark shadows near the wine cellar, another figure steps forward. It is Mr. Sterling, the wealthy owner of L'Étoile, and he isn't alone. Walking heavily right behind him are two uniformed city police officers. Laurent's eyes dart wildly from the owner to the police. "Mr. Sterling," Laurent stammers, pointing a shaking finger at Elias. "This crazy old man, he threw ice into the fryers. He—" "Shut your mouth, Laurent," Sterling snaps. The owner's face is a mask of pure, boiling rage. He throws a thick, heavy stack of printed financial documents directly onto table 4. "An emergency financial audit," Sterling hisses. "Triggered an hour ago when my suppliers called about unpaid invoices. You weren't just taking photos for the internet, were you?" Laurent begins to violently shake. 6 months, Sterling continues, his voice rising for the whole room to hear. "You've been ordering cheap, synthetic chemical truffle oil and billing the restaurant for imported Italian whites. You pocketed $20,000. And worse, you've been stealing the cash tips meant for the dishwashing staff." Elias stands completely still, his bloody hand resting quietly at his side. One of the police officers steps forward, grabbing Laurent roughly by the shoulder. "Hands behind your back," the officer orders. Click. The sharp, heavy sound of cold steel handcuffs locking tightly around Laurent's wrists rings out. The arrogant head chef bursts into pathetic, ugly tears. His pristine white suede shoes drag uselessly across the floor as the officers physically pull him away. He is marched directly through the center of the dining room. Every wealthy guest, every line cook peering through the kitchen window, watches his absolute, humiliating destruction. His career is completely, permanently dead. Elias doesn't smile. He doesn't gloat. He just watches the arrogant boy disappear through the front doors. The heavy silence returns. Sterling turns to the old dishwasher, looking down at the bloody gauze. "Elias," the owner says quietly, "I didn't know. What can I do?" Elias looks at the empty porcelain plate on the table. "Get Julian a new cutting board," Elias murmurs, "and tell them to turn the heat down on the fryers." 6 months later, the main kitchen at L'Etoile doesn't sound like a war zone anymore. The frantic, terrified shouting is completely gone. It sounds exactly like a church. There is only the low, steady hiss of simmering stock and the rhythmic, precise chopping of sharp steel against wood. Elias stands at the head of the prep station. He wears a plain, heavy cotton chef's coat. There is no gold embroidery on his chest. His sleeves are rolled up past his elbows, openly showing the thick, silvery burn scars from his past and the dark, heavy tissue damage on his right hand from the boiling grease trap. He doesn't hide them. They are the marks of his trade. He stands quietly next to Julian, gently guiding the young boy's elbow as they carve a perfectly rested roast. Julian wears the crisp black apron of a sous chef now. Laurent is a forgotten memory. He is currently serving a 3-year sentence in a state facility for corporate fraud and employee theft. His social media accounts are entirely deleted. When Mr. Sterling begged Elias to take over as executive chef, offering a massive partnership deal and a percentage of the restaurant's profits, Elias didn't buy an expensive sports car. He didn't buy a custom wardrobe. Instead, he walked into a bank and established a private trust, the Marie Culinary Foundation. It is a completely quiet, unadvertised charity. Every single month, a massive portion of Elias's profits goes directly into this fund. It has 2 strict purposes. First, it aggressively pays off the crushing medical debts of low-income kitchen workers, so no one ever has to lose their home to buy oxygen for someone they love. Second, it provides full-ride culinary scholarships exclusively to dishwashers and floor sweepers who want to learn, but can't afford the tuition. Elias took the deepest, most agonizing grief of his life and turned it into a permanent lifeline for the invisible people at the bottom. He wipes his scarred hand on a clean towel, looking out over the calm, perfectly organized kitchen. He is finally at peace. We live in a world that constantly misunderstands volume. We are taught to assume that the loudest person in the room is the most competent. We let people with expensive clothes, arrogant voices, and completely empty titles dictate our worth. We walk past the people, scrubbing the floors, emptying the trash, and doing the heavy lifting, assuming their silence means they have nothing valuable to offer. But as Elias proved, true mastery doesn't need to shout. It doesn't demand a camera, and it doesn't need to step on others to feel tall. True power waits patiently until the exact moment it is needed, because the truth always speaks loudest in silence. Tell me, have you ever been judged entirely by your job title or the clothes on your back? Have you ever had to bite your tongue and stand quietly, while an arrogant gatekeeper mistakenly assumed your silence was weakness? How did you finally prove them wrong? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if you believe that hard work eventually pays off and that karma never misses a debt, hit that subscribe button Until next time, stay quiet and stay sharp.